Picture this: the 25th floor conference room at Vanguard Dynamics in downtown Seattle. All glass walls and polished concrete. The kind of space that screams innovation until the air turns thick with dread. It was 8:57 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday. I stepped in without a calendar invite. Just a terse call from the chief of staff saying, "Elena." Quick conversation upstairs. Brooke Langford, our new CEO, barely 32, lounged in the ergonomic chair at the head of the table, heels propped against the frame like she owned every molecule in the room. She didn't look up from her phone, just slid a single printed page across the mahogany toward me. "Security will escort you out," she said, voice flat, dismissive, the way you might tell a barista you wanted oat milk instead. Two guards hovered behind me, shifting uncomfortably in their uniforms. Marcus Hale, the lead corporate counsel, sat to her left, legal pad open, laptop glowing. Vin Patel, her chief of staff, stood arms crossed near the window pretending to admire the space needle through the drizzle. I looked at the termination letter. Cold ink. No warmth from the printer. No thanks. No reorg language. No fake empathy. Just efficient startup brutality language cutting me loose after 12 years. I reached into my blazer pocket slowly. Not a folder. Not a protest. Just my badge, number 217. The one I'd carried since the early days when Vanguard was still called Stratton Legacy Partners. I didn't hand it to Brooke. I turned to Marcus, met his eyes, and placed it gently in his open palm. For a heartbeat, he thought it was compliance. A quiet exit. Then he actually looked at it. The freeze happened instantly. His eyebrows knit. Breath caught. He flipped the badge. Studied the embedded chip. The ID code laser-etched into the polycarbonate. MS. Langford, he said, voice suddenly thin. About the board protocols. "We need forensics on this badge immediately." Brooke finally glanced up, annoyed at the interruption. Thumb still hovering mid-text. "What are you talking about?" "Marcus." He didn't answer her. He opened his laptop with both hands, fingers flying. Vin unfolded his arms. The guards exchanged glances. I stood perfectly still, arms relaxed at my sides, feeling the slow burn of 12 years of silence finally paying its dividend. That badge wasn't just plastic and RFID. It was the root credential for the entire governance kernel I had architected 3 years earlier under the previous leadership. Protocol 57C, buried in the executive charter, ratified by the full board after a near-disastrous acquisition. It required unanimous board approval to deactivate any legacy master credential, especially the architect's. Without it, the system triggered a full lockdown cascade, equity transactions frozen, board quorum invalidated, investor communications halted, smart contracts sealed under cryptographic compliance rules. Brooke had never read the fine print. She'd breezed through onboarding docs, clicked accept in record time, and posted LinkedIn updates about slaying legacy dragons. She never noticed the quiet double ping on her voice auth sessions or the micro delay in asset sign-off consoles. She thought she was modernizing. Instead, she had just yanked the tripwire on her own empire. The room's silence thickened. Brooke's posture stiffened. Her eyes darted between Marcus and me. "Somebody explain this right now," she snapped. But the edge in her voice cracked just slightly. Marcus cleared his throat. "The badge is active. Credential chain invalidated. Lockdown protocol engaged per Charter Clause 57C. That's when the screen started lighting up, red banners cascading across every executive dashboard in the building. Quorum validation failed. Transaction queue frozen. Voting rights suspended. The 9:30 investor call, the one Brooke had prepped for weeks, auto-canceled itself. The proprietary chain of trust engine spun into self-sealed mode. All because the one person who had been the invisible spine of digital governance had been terminated like disposable middleware. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched the realization spread across their faces like slow poison. Brooke reached for her phone with jittery fingers, tapped her PIN twice before it unlocked, and started whispering urgently into it. Marcus watched the flood of alerts on his screen, reflection dancing in his glasses. Vin whispered something to her. The air felt thinner. Oxygen quietly siphoned away. You have to understand how we got here. 12 years ago, I was Elena Harper, the quiet systems architect on floor 14 near the server farm. Most people knew of me, but not my name. I handled the credential pipelines, the lineage trackers, the executive override trees that secured board comp packages, equity moves, investor communications. Everything that kept a pre-IPO tech company from imploding under regulatory scrutiny. I didn't do happy hours. I didn't wear branded hoodies. But if you needed to finalize a deal or move assets through locked protocols, my keys were the last gate. Then Brooke arrived like a hurricane from a flashy VC-backed fintech that had burned bright and crashed. New signage. New slogans. Weekly all-hands videos preaching, move fast and flatten the stack. She brought consultants who smiled too wide and asked too few questions. 1 month in, I was pulled from a credential rollout to a meeting called System Rationalization. Translation: identify who could be cut because someone's contact found a cheaper SaaS tool. Brooke didn't even stay for the full meeting. She sent Vin, who glanced at my slides for 3 seconds and said, "Can't we just migrate everything to the cloud?" I remember blinking slowly and asking which part exactly: the lineage tracker, the credential loopback, the board authentication tree. He smiled like I'd handed him a puzzle.
We're simplifying.
Old guard slows us down. My systems were the cloud they wanted, encrypted loops tied to executive protocols. Contractual triggers, so deep legal had to book time to parse them. I was the old guard. Yes. But I had designed the gates and knew exactly which wires would trip if you fired the wrong person the wrong way. So I started listening more than talking. I logged everything. When their simplification team asked about badge workflows, I told them what they wanted to hear. It's handled. They never asked how. They never audited the final firmware layer on the oldest badge in the system.
Mine.
Protocol 57C linked all legacy executive credentials to a central certificate holder, me. Deactivation required unanimous board vote. Otherwise, the badge initiated governance lockout. I had proposed it years earlier as a failsafe after a near breach during the Veritas deal. The board had called me their insurance policy over flat ginger ale in the executive lounge. Brooke never questioned why her governance console pinged twice. Never noticed the tiny delay. She thought she was cleaning house when she ordered me escorted out. Instead, she kicked the one wire that held the entire structure together. By the time the alerts finished stacking, the executive floor had descended into triage mode. Brooke's assistant paced the carpet, leaving invisible tread marks while calls bounced between disconnected IT leads and suddenly silent consultants. The investor Q&A that was supposed to be her victory lap now sat dead on calendars. Media, shareholders, analysts, even a few SEC observers given our pre-IPO positioning, all waiting on a call that could not start because quorum authentication failed. The system required 3 specific executive signatures validated through roles and functions, all anchored by my root credential. With 217 flagged as improperly deactivated, everything downstream invalidated. A hard regulatory lock triggered automatically, freezing outbound transactions, equity events, material risk updates. The smart contract engine powered by our proprietary trust software cocooned itself in compliance lockdown. Brooke didn't understand half the legal jargon, but she understood the consequence. The board would be on that call. And right now she could not log in. Neither could the CFO. Neither could the chair proxy. Yet I could, from anywhere, any device. The passive observer channel I had quietly maintained. That's when the strained whisper yells began. Her assistant tried manual credential resets. Permission denied, locked under legacy governance clause. Reroute through backup proxy? Flagged unverified source. SEC notification issued automatically. They didn't know yet that I had already sent an encrypted memo at 7:42 a.m. under my consulting LLC. Ironclad governance partners. Timestamped and CC'd to 3 compliance officers. Subject line: Governance violation at Vanguard Dynamics, Protocol 57C triggered by improper termination. Full chain of events. Screenshots. Legal context. Copy of the original clause. Attached formal statement asserting unauthorized override and automated compliance locks. That memo wasn't revenge. It was documentation. Now the spotlight it created turned every quiet moment into an interrogation chamber. Marcus asked her point-blank, "Did you obtain unanimous board approval before deactivating the root credential?" Brooke hesitated. That pause said everything.
No.
It was legacy. Obsolete. Legacy doesn't mean optional, Marcus replied, arms folded. We now have a non-compliant event reported to the SEC before our quarterly call, which cannot proceed. Someone tried restarting the call manually. System kicked back. Investor Quorum Lock Resolution Authority, credential holder 217. External consultant. All eyes turned toward me. Still seated in the corner. Still holding the untouched coffee someone had brought earlier. Still ghost-level calm. I didn't offer to fix anything. I waited. The longer the silence stretched, the clearer it became this wasn't a technical hiccup. It was governance collapse. And Brooke Langford had pulled the pin herself. To understand why the trap was so perfectly set, go back 3 years. After the Veritas acquisition nearly exposed us to a major breach, the board gave me carte blanche to embed an undetectable failsafe. They wanted something casual auditors couldn't spot, something that couldn't be reverse-engineered or accidentally patched, something that would trigger internal legal alerts if tampered with. I delivered exactly that, and went one step further. I nested the kernel underneath the standard credentialing layer, inside the firmware, above boot protocol but below anything accessible via admin panel. You could plug badge 217 into 100 readers and never see it, but attempt to sever its access without the proper board authorization chain and lockdown initiated immediately.
Totally.
Irrevocably. Brooks Consultants had assumed everything modernized. Their biggest achievement was a Medium post about flattening the stack. They never asked about legacy firmware. Now, every executive voting rights door blinked yellow. Transactional smart contracts froze mid-process. The next investor call auto-canceled by a smart rule I had written 4 fiscal years earlier. Brooks' voice climbed in the background. What do you mean it's hard-coded? No. I don't have a secondary route. Why the hell would there only be one? Marcus answered quietly. Because that's how you signed it when you accepted the charter. Her face showed the mixture of white-hot anger and ice-cold dread. I'd seen that expression before, on our previous CFO the day he tried sneaking a bonus acceleration without board notice. The system flagged it and routed the unauthorized transfer straight to my inbox. Protocol 57C was never a suggestion. It was a commandment. Vin tried. Isn't there a workaround? Marcus looked straight at me. There is. It requires reauthorization by the original certificate holder. The silence that followed thudded like a body hitting concrete. Brooke had talked endlessly about disruption, about cutting dead wood. She had forgotten you don't uproot the roots without everything above crashing down. And I was the root still active, still holding the one credential that said the company listened to protocol before it breathed. By 9:06 the floor was full tria. I sat quietly sipping coffee no one had remembered to remove. Brooks' calls kept failing. The 9:30 call remained dead. Legal kept pressing. The SEC memo was already out there, time-stamped, with audit trails. Heat from that spotlight turned every second into pressure. Thursday morning, the chairman received a 42-page report compiled by internal counsel and 2 external governance advisors paid hazard rates to dissect the disaster. The trace ran directly through Badge 217, through ironclad governance partners' signature on every flagged certificate for the past 3 fiscal years. Page 6 bold red, improper termination of executive root credential holder without board vote. Protocol 57C violation. Page 10. Governance cascade triggered. SEC informed prior to remediation. Page 14. Reinstatement unavailable without holder authorization. No ambiguity. Brooks' authority to terminate me had been procedurally invalid. Her refusal to reverse course after lockdown only deepened the breach. I wasn't in the room when the conversation happened, but I can imagine the quiet voices, the measured language people use when damage is permanent, and the only question left is how gently to walk someone off the plank. Through my attorney, I heard the chairman slid the folder across and said, "You need to consider what's best for the company." Translation: resign or face public defrocking by our own charter. That afternoon, Brooks stepped away to focus on personal priorities. No press release. No LinkedIn post. Just a one-line update in the shareholder portal and an out-of-office reply saying she'd be unavailable for an extended period. Meanwhile, ironclad governance partners submitted a formal response. Not a victory lap. Just a release letter pending final license settlement. Line item: breach of credential continuity, $7.2 million remediation fee. Not a demand, a contractual fact. The clause had been written with a contingency rate for improper override, built into the original service agreement when the kernel was embedded. Contingent on procedural breach, not harm. They could have read it any time. Brooks simply never imagined the quiet woman near the server farm was the clause itself. The call came late Thursday night. My attorney answered, listened, smiled, then said, "We'll confirm receipt once funds clear."
Clean.
No escalation. No threats. Just resignation in every sense. They didn't just lose a CEO. They paid 7 figures to breathe again. All because she thought I was obsolete. Turns out I was the fail-safe, patient, professional, never expendable. She had made the mistake of pulling the trigger on a system she never bothered to understand. The cost, exactly $7.2 million. Wired in full by Friday close. The next board meeting took place in the West Conference Suite, 1 floor below the glass room where they tried to cut me loose. First agenda item: governance reset protocol. Quietly worded. Clinically executed. All executive badges revoked and reissued with clean slates. Fresh keys. New 2-factor biometric layers. All except one, mine. Ironclad governance partners received a permanent passive observer credential. Non-voting, but immutable. A ghost presence in the infrastructure logs, always watching. Never overridden. Never removed. The chairman didn't mention my name. No one did. But the clause that created the role was read aloud, recorded, and signed off by every member present. I knew the words by heart. I had written them. Brooks' name vanished, not suspended.
Scrubbed.
Her resignation letter released publicly made no mention of governance errors or the breach that stalled the investor call. No one talked about Protocol 57C or the lockdown cascade. But the tech press always finds the smoke. A small blog out of Seattle, written by governance nerds and ex-DevOps engineers, dug up the SEC memo with full time-stamped attachments. Headline: The $7.2 million badge, how one credential froze a tech unicorn. Not viral. But the right people read it: insiders, analysts, consultants who understood what it meant when a root credential didn't just grant access. It held structural power. I wasn't named. Just the original architect of Vanguard Dynamics' internal governance kernel. That was fine. Let Brooke chase spotlights. I had spent 12 years building a system designed to outlive vanity, ego, and leadership that treated governance as optional. Now, every new executive onboarding passed through the same provisioning framework, same verification flow, same back-end signature. And buried beneath it all, ironclad, not a name on a door, just a line of code humming beneath the foundation. You don't need to speak loudly when your architecture whispers truth into every transaction. Months passed. Vanguard Dynamics moved on the way companies do, polished new initiatives, fresher branding, a new CEO who came from legal, precise, composed, careful with every step inside the framework I left behind. She didn't rip anything out, didn't poke the ghost. She kept the clause in place, retired override attempts, quietly ensured ironclad remained in the documentation. No speech, no award, just one line buried in the technical appendix of the annual compliance log. Credential continuity maintained per governance remediation terms. Ironclad governance partners. In the 10-K filed that spring, one sentence on page 214, remediation license paid. Ironclad Governance Partners, LLC. Amounts sealed. But everyone who mattered knew. You don't settle 7 figures for a malfunction. You settle 7 figures for survival. Inside the data center logs, buried in the credential heartbeat systems, one light still blinks, quiet, steady. Once a year during proxy season, when the board runs full-spectrum authentication and governance chain reconciliation, it pings every holder across the executive stack. And, at the end of that sequence, it pings the passive observer credential tied to badge 217. A ghost key no one can remove. Not because I demanded it, but because the system was written that way.
Because I wrote it that way.
It doesn't ring, doesn't flash, doesn't trigger confetti in Slack. It just pings, one quiet handshake confirming the observer credential never expired. They tried to erase the woman, but the system still knows who its architect is. And in that quiet blink every March, just before the board signs off on another year of imagined control, it whispers back, still here. Looking back, the real story wasn't the money or the resignation. It was the moment Brooke realized the quiet woman she dismissed as legacy wasn't just part of the machine. She had become the machine's conscience. Its final safeguard. Its memory. She had treated governance like an inconvenient checkbox. Something to click through on the way to disruption glory. She never understood that the most powerful code isn't flashy APIs or cloud migrations. It's the invisible clauses, the buried kernels, the dead man switches written by people who spend years listening when everyone else is talking. I never wanted the spotlight. I wanted the structure to survive ambition. And when ambition came wearing designer heels and disruption slogans, the structure did exactly what it was designed to do. Protect itself by exposing the flaw. There are nights I still sit in my home office overlooking Elliott Bay, the city lights reflecting on the water, and replay that Tuesday morning. The way Marcus's face changed when he read the chip. The way Brooke's confident posture finally curved. The way the entire C-suite suddenly understood that the woman they called non-essential held every essential thread. The moral lingers like Seattle mist, in a world obsessed with moving fast and breaking things. Never forget the quiet architect who built the things you're trying to break. Because some foundations aren't meant to be flattened. They're meant to hold. And when you yank the wrong wire, the building doesn't just wobble, it reminds you exactly who laid the first brick. Brooke Langford chased the next shiny opportunity. No doubt spinning her Vanguard chapter as strategic transition on her next LinkedIn profile. Meanwhile, every new hire at Vanguard passes through the same invisible gate I designed. Every board vote still carries the echo of Protocol 57C. And once a year that single ping confirms the ghost is still watching, not with malice, but with the quiet satisfaction of a system that remembered its own rules when the people running it forgot. You can modernize the facade, rebrand the mission, replace the leadership, but you cannot delete the architect while the building still stands. Not without the whole structure turning its gaze back on you and asking the one question that matters. Did you really read the fine print? The answer, for Brooke, arrived too late, delivered not in a dramatic confrontation, but in the soft, relentless logic of code that outlasted her tenure and outmaneuvered her ambition. $7.2 million later. The company learned the same lesson every empire eventually does. The most dangerous person in the room is often the one you never noticed until the lights went out. And in the dark, the system still remembers who turned them off. The final piece of a story isn't dramatic. It's ordinary. I still consult quietly through ironclad governance partners. Smaller clients now, mid-sized tech firms that actually read the charters they sign. I no longer sit on the 14th floor near the server cage. I work from a light-filled home office with views of the sound, coffee that doesn't taste like regret, and the satisfaction of knowing the safeguards I built continue to function without my daily presence. Vanguard Dynamics stabilized. The new CEO from legal brought precision and respect for process. She didn't try to erase history, she integrated it. During one quarterly all-hands, she referenced strengthening credential continuity without naming names or clauses. The message was clear to those who knew. We learned the hard way. Occasionally, I receive polite emails from Marcus Hale asking for clarification on legacy protocol interpretations. I answer factually, professionally, never with triumph. The passive observer credential ensures I see the high-level audit summaries once a quarter. Everything looks clean. The pings arrive on schedule. The system is healthy. But every March, when that final ping lands, I pause for a moment. Not to celebrate, but to remember the human cost. Brooke's ambition wasn't evil, it was unchecked. She believed speed and disruption could outrun accountability. The system proved otherwise. Not out of vengeance, but out of design. That distinction matters. The lingering question I leave you with is this. In your own company, your own career, who holds the invisible keys? The loud voices promising reinvention? Or the quiet professionals who quietly embedded the rules that keep everything standing when the hype fades? We celebrate the disruptors, the visionaries, the ones who move fast. Rarely do we honor the architects who make sure the movement doesn't collapse the building. Yet when the collapse comes, and it always threatens, the quiet ones are the last firewall between order and chaos. I never wanted to be the story. I wanted the story to have a safe ending. Thanks to Protocol 57C, Vanguard Dynamics got one expensive, humbling, but ultimately intact. Brooke got a lesson in reading the fine print. And I got the quiet confirmation that some legacies aren't erased by termination letters or bold new slogans. They endure in the code, in the logs, in the single annual ping that says, the ghost is still here, still watching, still protecting, not because it must, but because it was built that way by someone who understood that true power isn't loud. It's embedded, patient, and impossible to fire without consequences. In the end, the company survived not despite the lockdown, but because of it. The $7.2 million wasn't punishment. It was tuition. Tuition in the School of Governance where the final exam is always pass/fail. And the quiet woman who graded the paper never needed to raise her voice. The building still stands. The architect still whispers through the walls. And somewhere in a Seattle high-rise, a single light blinks once a year, reminding everyone who cares to notice, respect the foundation, or learn the hard way what happens when you don't.